Thank you. So Steve, you can go. That's the last one.
Yeah, usually.
Okay.
You wanted to give some handouts to people?
Well, I have 3 handouts. You guys are welcome to collect them later if you want. I'll just leave them here for now.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's good.
I'll draw reference to them as I speak. Anyway, one of them is a paper I did many years ago. The other is the primary reference that I used, and another one is a more recent paper that I drew from the presentation. Okay. All right.
So Steve is a radar engineer, working engineer. You're seeing in real life,
So,
unlike you people.
so I feel like I'm at a CDR now at work. So the title is In Pursuit of the World's Most Sensitive Detector, Tangential Signal Sensitivity Analysis, we call it TSS, with an introduction to match filter techniques, okay? And this is a block diagram of a typical analog receiver that we do. And this block here, this is a very critical block. That's a bandpass filter. And the placement of it is very critical. It goes after the input preamplifier, and its job is to minimize the noise, right? Before detection. That's a square law detector. And we can modulate the RF carrier down to baseband. That square law detector, as you can see, it's square law for power levels below minus 20 dBm. I want to just mention though that there is a new detector now available that I have coming in to evaluate, but it's made out of gallium arsenide, and it supposedly will have square law characteristics up to 0 dBm, and that can be very useful for certain applications. But again, that I just received some of those in, so I will be evaluating that soon. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a word on white versus colored noise. Now, in my opinion, purely white noise is just a theoretical tool. In practice, most noise sources fall into the colored category. I retract that a little bit now, because you can whiten colored noise with certain types of filters, for instance, differentiators. You can peak the high frequency content, but this is just food for thought. I will say this though, many microwave devices that operate, active devices that operate in the microwave wavelengths, in the centimeter sort of wavelengths, they are actually pretty flat through their microwave region, like 2 to 18 gigahertz roughly, right? 2 to 20 gigahertz. Millimeter starts somewhere around 26 gigahertz. All right, actually 30 gigahertz exactly. Anyway, all right, next slide. Okay, so this is the premise of what we're doing here. It has to do with we have to define what it is the sensitivity is going to be based on. So it's going to be what's called tangential signal sensitivity, or tangential sensitivity in itself. And what that is this is in a time domain. This is a pulse, sort of, it's basically a pulse. And basically you can see that these bottom noise peaks are tangent to these upper noise peaks here, or even with them. And I want to convert this over to the decision domain to get sort of like something we're familiar with seeing in our class, right? And what we note here is the ideal, for TSS, the ideal signal noise ratio is 4 dB. That's in a couple of papers. And ideally, we want to have minimum overlap for the best probability of detection. Next slide, please. And here we can see that if we're at TSS, there's still possibility of going over the threshold. We want to avoid that. So what happens is many times system designers, they'll use a higher ratio than 4 dB, so to minimize false alarms. I want to say one other thing though about the Can you go back to this slide again, please?
Yeah, this one?
Yeah. Basically, this is mostly done by visual manual measurements performed by skilled operators. When you get into more automated systems, you really need a higher signal-to-noise ratio to avoid overshoots, high noise spikes that go over the threshold. Anyway, but again, it says it right there, system designers may choose to use a higher signal-to-noise ratio factor. Okay, next. And then next.
Do you, just go back one more slide, do you integrate, why don't you integrate over each of those pulses? Is that possible or no? In time domain?
You integrate them?
If you integrate over that, you can at least beat the noise a bit, right?
Well,
So if you integrate that one, you will get more or less like another pulse, but
smooth it. Smooth it.
Yeah.
Well, we need to maintain a certain pulse response too. So there's a trade-off. I see what you mean. You definitely can brute force low pass filter it down.
But then you lose the edges. Right?
Yeah, then I'll use the
Yeah.
response time. Response time is very important in many radar applications. Okay, so this is a useful nomograph. Basically, it shows signal-to-noise ratio as a function of probability of detection and false alarm rate. In this particular case, we have a 12 dB signal-to-noise ratio, and for 98% probability of detection, and a false alarm rate of 10 to the minus thirds, which basically means 1 out of 1,000 bits will be false. And you can extend that by converting this to probability of miss, which is 1 minus PD, and that works out to be 0.02, 2%, and that translates to 20 misses per 1,000 received bits. So this is a useful graph. Okay, next. All right, so I want to point out that I did calculations for 3 cases. These were done deliberately with 3 different RF bandwidths. Now, what's missing here is, the bandpass filter I showed you on the first slide? That should be there because that is how we control the RF bandwidth. Here, this case 1 is for RF bandwidth of 1,000 megahertz. We define them in megahertz. And then all of these parameters stay constant for the 3 cases I'm about to show you. And then we need to calculate a couple of things. The TSS max is defined by S max plus 10 times the log of 2.5. And this 10 times the log of 2.5, that is from square law detection, and it equates to be 4 dB. S max is the effective noise power at the amplifier input. All right. This equation is in this paper here, one of the handouts, and it's also derived. The derivation is in the appendix of that paper. It's actually very good if anybody who's ever taken 611, which I think you all have, it's based on that type of analysis. Anyway, so moving on here, I determined that S max is minus 91.5 dBm. And then the other key parameter we have to find is S of X, which is normal threshold sensitivity for a square law detector with a pulse power equals noise power. And going through all that, Sx turns out to be minus 50.49 dBm. Next slide. All right, then we have to figure out what our preamplifier minimum gain needs to be to achieve this TSS value. And in this case, it needs to be 44 dB. And then this TSS modified, which is taking into account a couple of other things that, again, are actually, those comments are addressed on page 7 of this handout. And so this modified sensitivity it ends up adding an extra half a dB. The final result is that we got a TSS of minus 87 dBm, which is 2 picowatts. Next slide. All right, this is case 2. The bandwidth is now 500 megahertz, 2-to-1 bandwidth reduction. Going through all the same number crunching, I end up with a sensitivity of minus 88.5. So note, a 2-to-1 bandwidth reduction yields about 1.5 dB of improvement, and that's in sensitivity. And that's very key in radar, because that yields about 15% more distance in radar. So a 100-mile radar is now a 115-mile radar. So this is very useful stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's do a 10-to-1 bandwidth reduction, okay? Punch through all the numbers again. And here we have now TSS of minus 93.3 dBm. Excuse my handwriting. I had to leave it like this, but the results were good, so I didn't mind scanning them in. This works out to be 500 femtowatts. Femto is 10 to the minus 15. So that's very low power, people. This is actually very useful stuff. I want to go on and say, I've done this before, so I'm very confident in this analysis, but I was trying to get actual lab results before this presentation, but they're not ready yet. The actual lab results will be forthcoming in approximately 2 weeks if anybody is interested. I'm making this right now for many reasons. Okay, next slide. All right, case 3.
What is case 3 again?
Case 3 was going down 10-to-1 bandwidth reduction.
Okay.
We're going down to 50 megahertz bandpass filter, right?
So
Now-
you get 6.3 dB more here?
Yeah. No, the bandwidth reduction for 10-to-1 actually, the sensitivity improvement for a 10-to-1 bandwidth reduction is 6.3 dB.
How much more distance roughly does that give you? Before we had 15%? Or?
Right. That's actually almost double the distance. That's, well, I mean, if 1.5 dB is 15%, you know,
Yeah.
so roughly, right?
Yeah.
So it's really good, you know, very useful. Now, this is actually case 4. I'm backtracking. I'm saying this is something that's more standard in industry. And here we have an RF bandwidth of 20,000 megahertz. This is just based on standard technology. No FEMT mimic low noise amplifiers. FEMT means pseudomorphic high electron mobility transistor monolithic microwave integrated circuit low noise amplifier, right? Broadband case. And crunching numbers for this, then you get a sensitivity of minus 73.5 dBm, which is approximately 45 picowatts. This is more standard stuff you see in industry. But I did want to point out that a company in Massachusetts called Hittite, they now have broadband mimics that have 5 dB noise figure. I used 8 here, because that's something we used commonly in the past. Anyway, this is just to show if you were just using standard broadband stuff, what you can achieve, and that's it. But if you're willing to really squish your band down, you can achieve very high sensitivities, and that's the purpose. Okay, let's move on to the digital stuff. So, just want to say that, okay, here we have, this is straight from the waveform design book. This is it. Here we have a time domain chirp signal illustrations, SNR analysis directly from the waveform diversity text. Okay, so here's a chirp signal in the time domain and the resultant output. By the way, I don't know if any of you know this, I found out that bats use chirp signals as navigation tools. You know that? I figured you would. You could look that up on the internet. So, based on the previous material, I realized that there is a potential for further improvements to sensitivity utilizing matched filter techniques and chirp signal waveforms. However, I need to sort out how this might physically be quantified in comparison to the TSS methods described earlier in this presentation. For now, it's like apples and oranges. Some work needs to be done here. Okay? Here's another key statement
That's
I want.
good, it looks like you have something to do there, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited about this. Here's a key statement. The receiver, this type of receiver, it effectively correlates the incoming received signal with a pre-known template of the transmitted signal, and when the energy peaks as a result of convolution over a pre-known time interval, we have a match.
Right.
This is why it's called a match filter.
Right,
I think that's a very key statement to
yeah,
make, right?
that's a good statement.
Right, and so here's some signal and noise analysis in the time domain. And so, next slide, final result is this. This is very key. Again, I have to get comfortable with it so I can take it to the lab and do something real with it and get some results and compare it to some of the other stuff I did, right? That's it. Okay, that's me 1.5 years ago after I had my brain operated on.
So this is a recovery process for Steve also, right?
Yes, this class is.
Challenging.
I was in a rehabilitation facility for 8 months in upstate New York for both physical and cognitive areas. And then when I finally got released, I said, I got my job back, and I said, well, let me go back down to Poly and take a course. So I took this course. Good therapy, huh?
All right, very good.
All right, so that's it. That was just 1.5 years ago, so thank you.
Why don't you distribute your papers and I think we can. Oh, listen to me. Remember, you collected data, you said